Okay, well, welcome back to the Wizard shop. Here I am surrounded by Hoovy disasters. If it isn't one, it's two and three, and sometimes they come in fours, I don't know. We've got the parts on this one sent off to BBI to be welded. We're waiting on that. Waiting on the cylinder head to be resurfaced for this one, and we can go back together on the Privia. Things have been hopping in the shop. And just seeing these engines starts to make me think about engines and how it's so common for everyone wanting to do LS swaps. It just got to me thinking about pulling in engines and putting them back in. And we recently did a video on engine swaps in general, just some general ideas, but I kind of wanted to focus today on LS swaps. Everyone says, oh, I got a 67 Chevy truck, someday I want to LS swap it. Or I've got a 72 Chevelle sitting out back, I'd like to LS swap it. What does that entail? What is the process to LS swap a vehicle? Now, I'm not talking about carbureting the LS motor. I'm talking about full-on, electrically, computer-controlled, fuel-injected LS swaps. I'll go through all the different steps and let's get started. So one of the first things that you're going to have to think about with your LS swap, it's very easy to think that you just bolt the motor in and run a few wires and you're good to go. It is way more complex than that. The LS swap is one of the simpler engines to swap in, and there's a huge aftermarket support for doing the swap. But even with that being said, it's very difficult. It can make you pull your hair out. One of the first things you need to look at is the fuel system. This is obviously not an LS motor. This is a 996 turbo motor. But I can still use parts of it to show you some things. These little rails right here on each side, where this line goes into, are fuel rails. They're not going to run off of your mechanical pump from your 350 V8 off of 6 psi or 5 psi of fuel pressure. This system on an LS motor is going to need 55 to start, and it needs to be around probably 40, 45 when it's running. You're not going to get that off of a 10 psi TBI pump or something like that. You need to think about a fuel pump. You need to think about connecting that fuel pump and its lines to this. Not specifically this one, but you're going to have a fitting on the LS motor. How are you going to connect the two? How are you going to keep them from coming apart and spraying, causing a fire? The second thing is a return line. There's a fuel pressure regulator on the fuel rail that any pressure over a certain amount, it sends it back to the fuel tank. So now you got to route a second line to your fuel tank. Fuel is constantly being drawn to the engine, pushed to the engine, running through the fuel rail, and either being consumed by the engine or sent back to the fuel tank. It's a loop. It's constantly going, constantly going. So you need to keep that in mind. You don't just run one fuel line up to it and start running it. You have to have a return line. The next thing in the fuel system you're going to need is an inertia switch. If you get into an accident and the car flips and it cuts a fuel line, it's just going to pump fuel endlessly and continually fan the flames bigger and higher. You can get these typically off of a Ford Taurus or something. They're just mounted in the footwell or different places on the car that when you get into an impact, it separates the connection and shuts off your fuel pump. You need to get some sort of an inertia switch. You don't need to be dying for your LS swap. Also, you'll need a fuel filter, obviously. You'll need to filter your fuel. So that takes care of the fuel system. The next thing we're going to talk about is the cooling system. On the LS motor, you're going to have coolant hoses going to the radiators that may not match up to what you have. You need to research the vehicle you have, where are the radiator inlet and outlet, how is that going to match up to the LS motor? That's pretty much research that you'll have to do, but that's something you need to think of on the cooling system. Also your heater hoses. You want heat in the winter when it's cold. If you're swapping into a Chevy motor, you'd probably be able to make your drive shaft work with minor modifications. They make kits to bolt up an LS motor to a 700 R4 or a TH400, a TH350. If you're putting it into a totally different vehicle, if you watch my previous video, you'll see that it can get out of hand trying to match up a drive shaft to your transmission. Now, your drive line is going to be something that you're going to have to research based on the vehicle you have, compare that with what the LS motor has. The next thing we're going to talk about is wiring and computers. I personally would not go through the trouble of an LS swap unless I was going to do it full-blown, computer-controlled, because I want NOx sensors working, I want air-fuel ratio working, so I don't want to worry about all that. I'm the type of guy, I don't really care for carburetors. I know how to work on them. I know how to adjust them. The thing is I don't want to. I don't really want to mess with that stuff. And if you're going to do a full computer-controlled LS motor, you're going to have a computer, the PCM. As we see here, this is a wiring harness on this Porsche motor. They make pre-made harnesses for LS swaps. You're going to have to order one of those. It's $500. There's PSI conversions that sells those. There's painless wiring harnesses that you can buy online. It all has the plugins and everything, and it just has simple battery and ground connections, and you'll have to run some wire from a fuel pump relay to your fuel pump. Now, it's not just easy as buying a computer online, because that computer, when you go to crank it, it's going to want to see security has been authorized when you turn the key. And in GM vehicles, this is called like passkey or VATS. It's going to be looking for that security chip, and if it doesn't see it, it's not going to start. You can either buy these PCMs pre-programmed and pre-made for standalone running, or you can buy a used one out of a junkyard and send it off and have it done. You need to have EGR deleted, you need to have EVAP system deleted, you need to have VATS or security system deleted, and probably your rear O2 sensors. You don't need a check engine light for that because you're probably not going to have one in an older project. That can all be done. It's totally doable. That's the nice thing about an LS swap. But you're going to have to run all these wires, plug them into the right sensors. You're going to have to hook up your PCM. That can be very time consuming to route all that. Also a small fuse box for power. The next thing you're going to have to worry about, which PCM to buy. During the different years that they made the LS motors, which could be the Vortec motors. Now people say a 5.3 Vortec or 4.8 Vortec, that's not an LS motor. And I say that's a bunch of malarkey. It is. I can take parts off of one and put on another on an LS1, LS2. I can take the water pump off one and put it on the other. You can swap parts all around. It's not as powerful in a truck, but the same stuff is there. The same block, the same everything. So on the crankshaft, there's a little reluctor wheel. It has little teeth, kind of like, it looks like a little gear. Some of the older models will be 24 teeth. Some of the newer ones will be 58 teeth. If you try to take a PCM for a 24 tooth crank sensor setup and hook it to a 58 tooth, it won't work. It'll be like, what in the world's going on here? It probably won't even start. You need to make sure that you have the right crank sensor setup and reluctor wheel to match the PCM that you're using. The crank sensor is right behind the starter on an LS motor. It's easy to get to, really. It's not too hard, but that's not something you can swap out and just swoop and change stuff around. You have to take the crank out and swap that around if you wanted to change it out. But just do your research and order the right one beforehand. Okay. Next thing is motor mounts. Make sure you're going to get the motor mounts to match up to where the original mounts are on your project. Now, being that's an LS motor, there's all kinds of aftermarket options out there. There's universal ones. There's ones you can weld in. There's ones you can bolt in. But that's going to be something you need to include in your budget as well. Motor mounts. How are you going to mount it? On the Cadillac, I had to modify a few things to make the motor mounts work, but it wasn't too big of a deal. I had to add some spacers and weld them in, but Motor mounts can be very simple if there's an aftermarket option out there, but if it's something crazy that you're trying to, like putting an LS swap into a Lamborghini Gallardo or something crazy, I don't think there's going to be very many options for something like that. But we got past the motor mounts. The next thing is exhaust. They make kits that have both headers. It can be routed. This mid dump headers, rear dump headers, side dump headers. You have to research that online, but there's all kinds of options for exhaust. I know this sounds like I'm just continually talking, but the thing is an LS swap can easily get out of hand just as well as any other swap. Is you get the motor bolted in and you start looking at this stuff and you're like, oh my God, I'm almost out of money. And I'm only halfway through this and I have so much to go yet. So these are things to think about when you want to do an LS swap. It's not like, oh yeah, I'll swap a motor in and bada bing, bada boom, it's done. It's not bada bing, bada boom. It's a lot of research and a lot of time involved. So you could bolt the motor in, but all you've done is made a boat anchor. Until you get all this stuff that I just talked about hooked up and working properly, it's not a running engine. It's not a drivable car. It has no value until you get it running. The next thing is air conditioning. Do you want AC? On an LS motor, the AC compressor is down at the passenger side bottom. And a lot of times it lands right on top of most cross members of trucks, Chevy trucks and Camaros and things. They make kits to relocate it, but that's more money. Another adapter, another part, another piece. Some people cut their cross members to fit the AC compressor. I probably wouldn't do that.
Does that change your serpentine belt configuration there,
Yeah,
Car Wizard?
Once you do that, you'll have to get the serpentine belt, the right one, the right length. That's more research you'll have to do. If you're wanting AC in your car, that's something you need to think about. It's going to be down at the bottom of the engine. You're probably going to have to move it up top or to the side. They have special kits to make it work. The alternator is not too big of a deal. It's just you need to have that hooked into your PCM and it'll take care of the rest for you. Your starter is not too big of a deal. There's the solenoid wire, the main battery, and you'll have to route that around, and the starter's not too big of a deal. Now, your brakes with the LS swap, typically if you're doing an older project especially, it's going to have vacuum booster in it, vacuum brakes. That's no problem. Just run the hose from the LS motor over to your old booster. It'll work just fine. Steering. Does your project have power steering? If it does, how are you going to tie that into the power steering pump? How are you going to make that work? If it's a GM, it's probably going to match up pretty good. But if you're trying to LS swap something that's strange or foreign to GM parts, how are you going to adapt all that? That's something you're going to have to research. I'm just helping you guys out here to give you an idea that even an LS swap can be mind-blowing. You can get in and over your head and be in trouble. And like I've mentioned in the previous video, oil pan. There's different oil pan configurations you can buy on LS motors now. They have mid and rear and low sump, they have shortened sumps, all kinds of different setups, but you're going to have to research that as well. Is the oil pan going to land in an improper place on top of a cross member or hit a steering linkage? That's something you're going to have to think of as well. Typically on the air cleaner, air filter, you can probably just put one of those K&N style aftermarket air filters on it. They'll take care of that. Or if it's coming out of a truck, you could just get the ductwork and the air box and mount it in your vehicle and use the stock setup. That's something that I would look into. It looks correct. It looks better than just a big cone filter sticking out on the end. I'm not a fan of cone filters. I don't like them. Speedometer. Your PCM is going to be looking for a signal from a 4L60E or whatever, 4L80E, whatever transmission was in it. And if it doesn't see it, it's not that huge of a deal. If you're using an electronic controlled transmission, you'll want to wire all that in. Your wiring harness that you order should come with all that. You're going to have to wire all that into your PCM. If you're going to use a mechanical speedometer, then you're going to need to make sure when you get your PCM that not to worry about a speed sensor, because it'll throw a code no speed or something like that. The next thing, and the last thing I'm going to go over, there's probably many other options, but I'm just giving you guys a quick video, some some of the main things to look into is the throttle. The older LS motors will have an actual cable actuated throttle, just like the old days. There's a throttle cable that manually opens your butterflies. And if that's the case, it's really not that big of a deal. But if you have throttle by wire, a newer LS motor, you're going to have to get the PCM to run that. You're going to have to get an electronic gas pedal that goes inside the cabin, right where your old gas pedal went. Typically you can get these off of a Camaro, Corvette, or truck or whatever, and you have to run the wiring for that. Otherwise, there's no way to interface your old gas pedal with a modern electronic throttle body. And in closing, one last thought, something to think about with doing any swap, or especially an LS swap, is tools. If you have a small little Craftsman set, 200-piece set, then you're working out of your garage, you're going to be in a world of hurt trying to make an LS swap work. It's just going to be very hard. I have all these tools here, probably 50, 60 grand worth of tools. Obviously you're not going to have as a do-it-yourself backyard mechanic, but you need to invest in a few tools if you're going to do a swap, because you're going to get to stuff and be like, man, I can't make this work. I don't have the extensions. I don't have this. And it'll make it so much harder. So invest in a good set of tools. And if you've got standard sets of tools, standard sizes, you're going to need metric for an LS swap. Everything's going to be metric. Everything is. There's not going to be standard bolts on. Now your project, the car you're putting it into may have standard bolts, but the LS motor and everything involved with it is not going to be, it's going to be metric bolts, metric tools. It's going to be very time consuming. As I've mentioned in my previous video about swaps, you're going to get to this point or that point and be like, oh, this starter isn't going to work, or this isn't going to work. Well, I'll have to go order this part. And now you wait a week or two to get the part from, especially eBay. You're waiting on the seller to get the part in the mail. Then the shipping time starts. That was a video that I recently did on crazy parts stories. Watch that video. It'll give you an idea of how difficult it can be getting parts together. It's like, man, I got a weekend free here and I could get this and this and this done. I'm still waiting on parts. There's a delay in shipping. It can be crazy. If you think you're going to have an LS swap done a couple weekends, it's not going to happen. I guess if you're a millionaire and you just buy up the whole store and everything that you want and you just have a mountain of parts come in, I guess you could make that happen. But most of us aren't that way. We would have to order as needed. What do we need now? Okay, now we order the part. Now we're to this point. We see that we need this and this and that. Now we can order those parts. It's very time consuming. Some of the stuff can be hard to find, like if you're trying to adapt a different power steering gearbox or a rack to a GM power steering pump. Having to research, is there adapters? Is there a guy in town that can cut and splice the hoses? Is this or that? I mean, it can be pretty aggravating figuring out stuff. If you got a local parts store that you're in real good relations with, and there's a guy in there who knows what he's doing, get in good with that guy, because he could tell you, oh yeah, this year 82 Camaro, blah blah blah, they have these parts, that'll line up for you. Here, let me go get it, and he'll bring it to you, and wow, it works. Just make sure you get in good with your parts guy. So a lot of you will also think, oh, I'll just email the Car Wizard. No, that won't work, because during the span of a week, my inbox just gets crammed full of car questions. There's no way I can answer all those and also run a shop. Check the forums out. There's forums and people that may have already done this swap that you're doing, that have already been through all the pitfalls or got past the hurdles. But emailing me are probably not going to be the option for you. And the people in the forums may also have access to where to get the parts or the links, or even say, hey, I ordered this part, here's the link, here's where I bought it, here's where you can get it, and there you go. So in closing, I just wanted to give you guys a heads up. It's easy to, it's like a catchphrase these days, LS swap. They even make t-shirts about LS swaps. And it's, oh, it's easy. No, it's not very easy. If you don't know about fuel injection, it can be very difficult. Make sure you get a budget together. Make sure you understand that you're not just going to be ordering 10 or 15 parts, it's probably 100 parts. And if you're getting a used motor, make sure it was a verified running motor. It's easy to find a $400 4.8 motor on Craigslist, and then you get it home and find out it's trashed or something's wrong with it. Make sure you got a verified, good running motor that you're going to use. If you're using a crate motor, then you'll have a warranty. But if you're getting a used motor, verify that it was running before you purchase it. So if any of the tools in previous videos that you've seen that you're interested in to purchase, or if you want to see what kind of tools I use, check my Amazon affiliates in the link below. And as you've seen in the previous video with the Aston Martin, and there's a lot of cool cars coming in. I just got a Lotus Esprit Turbo in. We're going to be doing a video on that. It's an S4S. Very, very nice car. Hit the subscribe button. You guys won't be disappointed. Thanks for watching.